The phone call came on a warm afternoon in Nairobi. I was sitting at the small table in my apartment, staring at my phone and waiting for the call I had been hoping for all week. After 3 interviews with a respected finance company, everything had gone perfectly. The manager had smiled during the last meeting and said they were impressed with my qualifications. I was already imagining my new life, finally stable, finally independent. When the phone finally rang, my heart jumped with excitement. I answered quickly. The manager greeted me politely, but something about his voice felt different this time. It was colder, more careful. "Amina," he said slowly, "before we continue, we need to ask you about something serious." My stomach tightened. "Of course," I replied, confused. "We received information about your criminal background." For a moment I thought I had heard him wrong. "My criminal background?" I repeated quietly. "Yes," he continued. "Someone claiming to be your father contacted our office. He warned us that you were involved in financial fraud and advised us not to hire you." My entire body went still. I could barely breathe. I had never even received a parking ticket in my life. "That's not true," I said quickly, my voice shaking. "I have never committed any crime." The manager sounded uncomfortable. "I understand. But the information came from a family member, and our company cannot take that risk." Within minutes the call ended. Just like that, the job I had worked so hard for disappeared. At first I thought it had to be some terrible misunderstanding. But later that evening, after making a few calls and asking a former classmate who worked in HR, I learned something that made my heart sink. The person calling employers and spreading lies about me was actually my father. My parents, Joseph and Ruth and Jerry, had been secretly contacting companies where I applied for work. They were telling them I was a criminal, all because I had refused to obey them. In their eyes, I had shamed the family. What I didn't know then was that someone else in my family had seen this kind of betrayal coming long before it happened. My grandmother had quietly prepared for it years ago, and her plan would soon change everything. I grew up in Mombasa, in a house where my parents believed children should never question their decisions. My father, Joseph and Jerry, was the kind of man who expected complete obedience. My mother, Ruth, rarely disagreed with him. In our home, rules were not discussed. They were simply followed. From the time I was young, my parents decided what I should study, who my friends should be, and even how I should behave in public. But there was one thing they could never control: my dreams. Ever since I was in secondary school, I wanted to build a career in finance. I loved numbers, business, and the idea of creating something successful on my own. I worked hard in school and eventually earned a place at a university in Nairobi. For me, it felt like the first real step toward independence. My parents, however, had very different plans for my future. During my final year at university, they invited me back home to Mombasa for what they called an important family discussion. I remember sitting in the living room while my father spoke proudly about a wealthy businessman who had been a close family friend for years. His son, Daniel, was successful and came from a powerful family. Then my father smiled and said something that made my heart drop. "We have arranged for you to marry him," he said calmly, as if the decision had already been made. First I thought he was joking. But he wasn't. My parents truly believed this was the best future for me. In their minds, a good marriage was more important than any career I could build. I tried to explain my dreams. I told them I wanted to finish my degree, find a job, and build my own life first. But the more I spoke, the angrier my father became. He slammed his hand on the table and said I was being disrespectful. My mother accused me of forgetting my family values. They both said I was embarrassing them by rejecting such a perfect opportunity. That night turned into one of the worst arguments of my life. When I refused again, my father's face became cold and distant. He said if I wanted to live life my own way, then I should do it without their help. From that day forward, they cut off all financial support and told relatives that I had become rebellious and ungrateful. It hurt deeply, but I still believed time would heal everything. I thought eventually they would calm down and accept my choices. What I never imagined was how far they were willing to go to punish me. At the time, I thought losing their support was the worst thing that could happen. I had no idea they would soon begin destroying something even more important: my reputation and my future. After the job in Nairobi disappeared, I told myself it was just bad luck. Maybe the company had chosen another candidate at the last minute. It happens to people all the time. So I took a deep breath, updated my resume again, and started applying for more jobs. Over the next 6 months, applying for jobs became my full-time routine. Every morning I opened my laptop and searched through job websites across Kenya. I applied to finance companies in Nairobi, accounting firms in Mombasa, and even banks in other cities. Soon I also started applying to companies in Tanzania, hoping a fresh start in another country might help. At first, things always seemed promising. Many companies actually invited me for interviews. Some were online while others were in person. I remember dressing carefully, practicing my answers and trying to stay confident. During the interviews, the managers often looked impressed. They asked about my university results, my internship experience, and my skills with financial software. Several times, the interviews ended with smiles and positive words. "We really like your profile," one manager told me. Another said, "You seem like a perfect fit for our team." Each time I left those meetings feeling hopeful. I would go home imagining how my life might change once I got the job. But then something strange kept happening. A few days later, everything would suddenly change. The same companies that seemed excited about hiring me would either stop replying completely or send short, cold emails. Some simply said they had decided to move forward with other candidates. Others gave vague explanations that didn't make sense. One message stayed in my mind. A company wrote that they had serious concerns about my background and could no longer continue the hiring process. I stared at that email for a long time, completely confused. What background concerns? My academic record was clean. I had never been involved in any scandal or trouble. At first I tried to ignore it, but as the same situation repeated again and again, a disturbing pattern started to appear. 20 applications, 15 interviews, and not a single job offer. Every time things seemed perfect, something invisible destroyed the opportunity. Soon I began to feel like someone was working against me behind the scenes. It felt as if every door I tried to open was being quietly closed before I could step through it. And deep down, a frightening question started growing in my mind. What if this wasn't bad luck at all? What if someone was deliberately sabotaging my future? One evening, after another long and exhausting day of job searching, I received an unexpected phone call. The number looked unfamiliar and for a moment I almost ignored it. But something told me to answer. "Hello, is this Amina Injeri?" A calm voice asked. "Yes, speaking," I replied. The woman on the other end introduced herself as an HR manager from one of the companies I had interviewed with a few weeks earlier in Nairobi. My heart immediately started beating faster. For a second I wondered if she was calling to give me good news. But her voice sounded serious. "Amina," she said quietly, "I probably shouldn't be making this call, but I felt you deserved to know the truth." Those words instantly made me nervous. She paused for a moment before continuing. "After your interview, our team actually wanted to hire you. Your qualifications were strong and the managers were impressed with you." Hearing that made me both hopeful and confused. "Then, what happened?" I asked. There was another short silence. "A few days after your interview," she explained carefully, "our office received a phone call from a man who claimed to be your father." My chest tightened. "He sounded very concerned," she continued. "He told us that you had been involved in serious financial fraud and warned us that hiring you could damage the company." For a moment I couldn't speak. My mind went completely blank. "That's not true," I finally said, my voice barely steady. "I have never done anything like that." "I believe you," she replied quickly. "But when accusations like that come from a close family member, companies usually take them very seriously. The management decided it was too risky." My hands started shaking as I held the phone. "Unfortunately," she added, "this wasn't the first time we heard something like that. Apparently the same man had contacted other companies where you applied." It felt like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. After the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time, staring at the wall of my small apartment. Everything suddenly made sense. The interviews that went well, the sudden rejections, the strange emails about my background. Someone had been poisoning my reputation everywhere I went. And the worst part was realizing who that person was. My own father. Joseph Njeri, the man who was supposed to protect me, was secretly calling companies and telling them I was a criminal. My mother Ruth likely knew about it too. The truth hit me like a wave. This wasn't just family anger anymore. My parents weren't simply disappointed in me for refusing their plans. They were actively destroying my future. That night after the phone call with the HR manager, I felt completely broken. I sat alone in my small Nairobi apartment with the lights off, staring out the window at the busy street below. Cars were passing, people were laughing somewhere outside, and life was moving on like nothing had happened. But inside me, everything felt heavy and quiet. I kept thinking about the truth I had just learned. My own parents were the reason my life kept falling apart. Every interview that went well, every job that suddenly disappeared, every opportunity that slipped away. It wasn't bad luck, it was them. For the first time in my life I felt completely alone. I didn't know who I could trust anymore. My parents had turned against me, and many relatives had already stopped speaking to me after I refused the marriage they arranged. The weight of it all made me feel like giving up. That's when a memory slowly came back to me. I thought about the one person who had always believed in me no matter what. My grandmother, Mama Abina Injeri. Even thinking about her name brought a small sense of comfort. Mama Abina had been very different from the rest of the family. She was kind, wise, and surprisingly independent for someone her age. While my parents believed in strict control and tradition, my grandmother believed young people should follow their own path. When I was younger, she used to sit with me on the veranda of her house in Mombasa while the ocean breeze moved through the trees. We would talk for hours about life, education, and dreams. She always listened carefully whenever I spoke about my plans for the future. "I want to build something of my own one day," I once told her. "I don't want to depend on anyone." Instead of laughing or criticizing me like others did, she simply smiled. "That's a good dream, Amina," she said gently. "Never let anyone convince you that your future belongs to them." But there was something else she used to say that I didn't fully understand at the time. Sometimes her expression would become serious and she would warn me quietly. "Not everyone in your own family will be happy to see you succeed," she once told me. "Greed and pride can make people do terrible things." Back then I thought she was just being overly protective. My parents were strict, yes, but I never believed they would actually try to hurt me. Now, sitting alone in my apartment years later, her words echoed in my mind louder than ever. For the first time I began to wonder if Mama Abina had seen something coming, something I had been too young and hopeful to notice. A few days after that painful night, I decided to clean my apartment. Not because I was in a good mood, but because I needed something to keep my mind busy. Sitting and thinking about my parents' betrayal was slowly driving me crazy. I needed a distraction. My apartment in Nairobi was small, but it was filled with a few things that meant a lot to me, especially the belongings I had kept from my grandmother, Mama Abina. When she passed away 2 years earlier, I had taken some of her old boxes and stored them in a corner of my room. At the time, I was too heartbroken to go through most of them. That afternoon I finally opened one of those boxes. Inside were small memories from her life. Old photographs, some traditional jewelry, a few notebooks and letters she had written years ago. As I touched those things, I felt a quiet wave of nostalgia. It reminded me of the peaceful afternoons we used to spend talking together. For a moment, the stress in my mind faded. Then something unusual caught my attention. At the bottom of the box, partly hidden under a stack of papers, was an old brown envelope. It looked different from everything else. My name was written clearly on the front in my grandmother's handwriting. Amina Injeri. My heart immediately started beating faster. I slowly picked up the envelope and turned it over in my hands. There was another message written on it, this time in slightly smaller letters. "Open if your parents ever try to destroy your future." I froze. Those words sent a strange chill through my body. It felt as if my grandmother had somehow predicted exactly what was happening to me now. My hands started trembling as I carefully opened the envelope. Inside, there was a folded letter and several official-looking documents. The papers had stamps and signatures on them like something from a lawyer's office. Confused and nervous, I unfolded the letter first. The moment I saw my grandmother's familiar handwriting, my eyes filled with tears. It felt like hearing her voice again after all this time. In the first line, she wrote something that made my heart race. "My dear Amina, if you are reading this, it means something I feared may have already happened." I swallowed hard and continued reading. "This letter is for the day when someone in our family tries to destroy your future." I sat there in complete silence, holding the paper in my shaking hands. Somehow, years before any of this happened, my grandmother had seen the possibility of this betrayal. And judging by the legal documents inside that envelope, she had also prepared something that could change everything. I took a deep breath and continued reading my grandmother's letter. Her handwriting was calm and steady, just like the way she used to speak. It felt almost as if she were sitting beside me again, explaining everything in her quiet, thoughtful voice. "My dear Amina," the letter said, "if this envelope has reached you at the right time, then it means life has become difficult in ways I feared." My chest tightened as I read each line carefully. She wrote that many years earlier she had begun to notice something worrying about our family. She loved everyone deeply, but she also understood that pride, control, and greed could sometimes push people to do harmful things, especially when someone refused to follow their expectations. "I always believed you would choose your own path," she wrote. And I was proud of you for that. But I also knew that your independence might make some people angry. That sentence alone made my eyes sting with tears. Then the letter revealed something I never expected. Years before she passed away, Mama Abina had quietly worked with a lawyer and financial advisor to create a plan for my future. Without telling anyone in the family, she had set up a private trust fund in my name. She had also created a small investment company that legally belonged to me. At first, I thought I misunderstood what I was reading. But then I looked at the documents inside the envelope again. They were official papers with stamps, signatures, and legal details. My grandmother hadn't been speaking metaphorically. She had literally built something for me. As I kept reading, the next part shocked me even more. The documents showed that the investment company owned several rental properties in Accra, Ghana. According to the records, those properties had been purchased years earlier and were already being managed by a local firm. Even more surprising, they had been quietly generating income for a long time. My grandmother explained in the letter that she chose Accra because it was a growing city with strong business opportunities. She believed the properties would become more valuable over time. All of this belongs to you, she wrote. It was created so that no one could control your future, not even your own family. I sat there staring at the papers, barely able to process what I had just discovered. The same parents who were trying to destroy my career had no idea that my grandmother had already built the foundation of a completely different future for me. And if these documents were real, my life was about to change in ways I had never imagined. For a few days after discovering the letter, I could hardly believe what I had found. Part of me wondered if there had been some mistake. The documents looked official, but the idea that my grandmother had secretly built an entire investment plan for me felt almost unreal. Still, the letter clearly mentioned a lawyer in Accra who had helped her arrange everything. His name was Kojo Mensah. After thinking about it for a long time, I finally gathered the courage to contact him. When I called his office and mentioned my grandmother's name, there was a short silence on the phone. Then his assistant calmly said, "Mr. Mensah has been expecting you to contact us one day." Hearing that sent a strange wave of emotions through me. It meant my grandmother truly had planned all of this years ago. Within a week, I booked a flight to Accra, Ghana. It was my first time traveling there, and the entire journey felt surreal. As the plane landed and I looked out at the busy city below, I kept thinking about my grandmother and how far ahead she must have been planning. The next morning, I walked into Kojo Mensah's law office carrying the envelope and documents. He was a calm, professional man who greeted me with a warm smile. "I knew your grandmother very well," he said kindly. "Mama Abina was a very intelligent woman." For the next 2 hours he carefully explained everything. Every single document in that envelope was real. Years earlier, my grandmother had created a private trust and investment company under my name. Through that company, she had purchased several rental apartment buildings in growing neighborhoods across Accra. She had also arranged for a professional property management company to run them. Then Mr. Mensah showed me the financial records. As I looked at the numbers on the pages, I felt my heart begin to race. The properties had been generating rental income for years. With the rising property values in Accra, their total worth had grown far beyond what my grandmother originally invested. By that point, the combined value of the properties and business assets had reached several $1 million. I sat there in stunned silence. Just weeks earlier, I had been desperately searching for a job, worried about paying my rent, and wondering if my parents had completely destroyed my future. But the truth was something they never expected. While they were busy trying to ruin my career, my grandmother had already built the foundation of something far bigger. Without even knowing it, I had just stepped into the beginning of my own financial empire. After that meeting in Accra, my life could have gone in many different directions. For a few days, I won't lie, I thought about my parents a lot. Part of me felt angry. Another part of me felt deeply hurt. They had tried to destroy my future, my reputation, and my confidence. Knowing that made it easy to imagine taking revenge. But every time those thoughts appeared, I remembered my grandmother. Mama Abina had not built all of this so I could fight with people or prove something to them. She created it to protect my freedom. She believed my life should be bigger than family conflict. So I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of focusing on revenge, I focused on growth. With the help of Kojo Mensah and a team of financial advisors, I began learning everything I could about the properties my grandmother had purchased. I visited the apartment buildings in different parts of Accra, met the managers, and studied how the rental business worked. At first it was overwhelming. I had studied finance, but running real properties and investments was a completely different challenge. Still, every day I became more confident. Within a year, I made my first major decision as the owner of the company. I invested in 2 more residential buildings in fast-growing neighborhoods. The rental income increased, and the business slowly started expanding beyond what my grandmother had originally created. But success wasn't the only thing on my mind. I kept thinking about the months I spent feeling powerless while my parents secretly ruined my job opportunities. I knew there were many young women across Africa facing similar situations. Families forcing them into marriages, blocking their education or controlling their careers. That thought stayed with me. So I used part of the company's profits to create something new, a foundation dedicated to helping young women build their own careers. The foundation provided scholarships, mentorship programs, and small business training for women who wanted independence but lacked support from their families. At first it started small. Just a few students, a few workshops, and a tiny office. But slowly something incredible began to happen. More and more young women heard my story. They related to the struggle, the family pressure, and the fear of losing their future. Many of them began reaching out, sharing their own experiences. Over time, the foundation grew across different countries. What started as pain in my life slowly turned into purpose. The same story that once felt like the end of my future had quietly become the beginning of something much bigger. Years later, I stood on the balcony of my office in Accra, looking out at the city skyline. The sun was setting, painting the tall buildings and busy streets in shades of gold and orange. From up here, everything looked peaceful, but I remembered how chaotic my life had once been. Just a few years earlier, I had been struggling to find a job, rejected by every company, and betrayed by the people who were supposed to love me the most, my parents. I took a deep breath and let myself smile. That young woman, scared and hopeless in Nairobi, would hardly recognize the life I had now. The properties my grandmother had secretly built, the investment company I now managed, and the foundation helping young women across Africa. It all felt surreal. My grandmother's wisdom and foresight had given me more than money. She had given me the tools to reclaim my life, my confidence, and my independence. I thought about my parents, Joseph and Ruth and Jerry. They had tried so hard to control me, to shame me, to ruin my reputation. But in trying to break me, they had done the exact opposite. They had forced me to face challenges, to fight for myself, and to discover my own strength. In a way, their betrayal had pushed me toward the very independence they feared. As I looked out over the city, I felt a sense of calm I had never known before. I had turned pain into power, fear into action, and betrayal into opportunity. I had built something they could never take away. Not just financial security, but a life of my own making. Thanks to Mama Abina, I had become stronger than anyone, including my parents, ever expected. The girl they tried to destroy had grown into a woman who could face any challenge, stand tall, and create a future entirely on her own terms. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free.